Good to go.
All right. Can you guys see my chart? And hear us both? All right. Cool. I think we've still got another minute or two, so I'll be right back. Well, we can go ahead and get kicked off whenever you're ready, Rock.
All right. Sounds good, Chris. Good to go.
All right. Hey, guys. So today is June 13th, 2019, and not a whole lot of change since last week. Been kind of a consolidation week. A couple of news pieces, a couple of things to look at, but for the most part, as far as price action's concerned, pretty quiet past week. The one thing I was looking at, if we just start kind of looking at Bitcoin here, is actually let's do this. So we'll start just by looking at the kind of the overview. You can see today, like kind of slightly bullish, mixed bag. The biggest one up today so far is Bitcoin SV for some reason.
Link popped off hard today. I think that's up like 50% right now.
Oh, nice. Yeah, let's take a look at the gainers. This is something that I don't do as often as I used to. Usually during like a full-on altcoin season, it's a little easier to look at. But yeah, I guess we can circle back around to this. Cool. So yeah, so let's do this. We'll start with Bitcoin. One thing I was actually looking at this morning was if we look at the Bitcoin longs here on Bitfinex, you can see we're kind of low. We're at the lower end of this channel that I drew up. And so what that typically means, and again, this is more of like a confirming indicator. It's not like something you really want to like just trade blindly off of. But if you look at these kind of inflection points where the longs get really low, that's typically where we can see breakouts. And when they peak out, that's usually times where things are risky and there's downside risk. And for example, if you look back here, this was, call it May 1st, right? Like the first week of May. If you correlate that with the price action here, that corresponds with right here, right? So Bitcoin, even though at the time, if we look at the chart, if we look at this as if it were live, whenever you see price action that's making like higher highs, but the low or the longs are at significant lows, that's actually a pretty bullish sign, right? And this was I think, was this the Bitfinex news this red day? One of them. There was the Tether news and then something. Anyway, there was some bad news right here.
Yeah, Binance got hacked too.
It was Binance.
The Bitfinex Tether news.
Yeah, I think like right here and right here, there's two events. But
Yeah.
anyway, the market shook it off and then it bounced off of these lows. It took a few days and then finally got back. But you can see we're kind of, we're back down around that. We're not quite as low, but we're back down around that level. And so I'm kind of watching the price action here. Just, again, looking to kind of frame this, and, I'll move trend lines and support zones around because they are dynamic areas. And it looks like right now we've got more of kind of like a bull flag type price action playing out where you get the pull and then you get the higher lows. And so I still see kind of the four potentials here that we talked about from last week, except we didn't really get a fast pullback unless the one thing that I do think could give us like a faster pullback for potential number one is let me kind of get rid of all these drawing tools. If you guys can see the head and shoulders here, right? So this could turn into a head and shoulders if 82 to 83, if buyers can't get through this zone. But let's say that later today or tomorrow, if we get a big green candle and then we get a volume spike through this kind of shoulder area and we get a close up above like 85, that to me would be actually a bullish signal. So we are at a pretty kind of strong inflection point right now. So like if we, today at the end, or if we wake up tomorrow and we have a big red candle, that would actually be in a way confirming the Head and Shoulders. And then that would lead me to look more for potential number one, which is that fast sell off, where let's just run a scenario like from 82s, if we got a fast sell off, that's kind of the minimum that I'd look for, is about a 25 to 30% sell off for a bounce play. But if that happened over the course of say 1 to 3 days, I would probably look to entertain that. That's kind of my sweet spot for bounce plays. But then, if number two plays out where it's a slow bleed, I wouldn't look to just, kind of buy the grind. I'd wait for some kind of reversal pattern. And then, again, if we got like some kind of multi-month consolidation like we saw in early 2016, that would actually be my favorite type of setup, because the longer the consolidation, typically the bigger the breakout, and the higher the probability is that the breakout is actually going to work, right? And then kind of the fourth potential here is parabola territory, where let's say we do get a big green day and it closes up higher, and then we just get overextended and we go right through 2000 or 10,000. That would be, getting kind of overextended. And one thing Rocky and I were talking about earlier was how Litecoin is kind of it's kind of weird. Litecoin is in a way leading the coins at this point. Like if you look from the lows on Bitcoin to the recent high, we're up shy of 200%, right? Where if we jump down to Litecoin, from the same low area, you can see price made a high of about 500%. Now, why is that? Well, got the Litecoin halving, right? So we're about 2 months, less than 2 months out-ish. And so I think what is happening is people are buying in anticipation of the halving. And Rocky, would you say earlier, how do you think this is going to be played?
Depending on price action. Like if it starts ramping up, and if there's any level of FOMO and price spikes leading up to the halving, if it starts to look parabolic and there are large green 1D spikes leading up to it, and I would see that as a good like sell on the news type setup. It could also be a good opportunity to possibly short, but it all depends on the price action, right? If leading up to the event, it's a non-event and the price doesn't do anything, or if it's just consolidating sideways and doesn't really do much, then you might not get that sell in the news. So usually it's like sell in the news is counterforce, depending on how much FOMO and exaggerated anticipation there is leading up to the event, right? That's kind of the key metric to look for in the market behavior with that particular maxim or rule. And so I found like if a market's like already selling for weeks before the news, then it's not really a FOMO event with counterparty. If anything, maybe some good news might lead to a bounce, right? Type of thing. Yeah. So it really depends on the market structure. But if it does start to ramp up in the next couple of months, or even especially like in the last week leading up to it,
because I think this yellow line somewhere around there is where the halving is going to be. So like you said, like say it goes parabolic and maybe it gets close to prior resistance around like 250 or so, that would be severely overextended by that time frame, right? If you can kind of imagine like what price action would look like.
Yeah. And it's interesting because Litecoin and Bitcoin their charts are almost identical for the first half of 2018. This descending triangle. And then Litecoin broke down first. It broke down a lot lower than where Bitcoin did because it's less liquid. Therefore, it also, to balance things out, it also went up a lot higher than Bitcoin did, percentage-wise. But it's interesting how it did kind of break down. It's like it showed the path of least resistance of where Bitcoin wanted to go in a sense.
Yeah, that is very interesting, right? I think, typically the smaller market cap, the more volatile on a percentage basis it can be.
Yeah.
But also, like, a lot of altcoins, even though they are lower liquidity and they can be more volatile, they very rarely lead Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Right? Like, Litecoin is kind of unique in that.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's very correlated to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
As well as a lot of the other altcoins. But in this particular instance, it was kind of interesting to watch that breakdown happen months before Bitcoin broke down on its descending triangle. And
Yeah.
it has a cleaner looking accumulation pattern, right?
It does. Yeah. I mean, we talked about, I think, we were mapping this trade scenario. When was this? This was back in March, early March, right? Because we saw the potential for like this head and shoulders, and and this is funny. This is where hindsight is so deceiving, because we looked at like the 70 zone as a good target. I mean, it wasn't awesome risk to reward, but you can see how overextended things can get. What looked like a 40% potential very quickly developed into 100% potential.
Yeah, for sure. And that's generally why scaling out incrementally is pretty good.
Yeah.
Probably scale some out that first target, leave a runner, scale a little bit more at each level up.
Yep.
Sure.
So I think, either way, this is just an interesting case, and, how fundamentals do affect price, right? Like, because people know the halving is coming up, and they inherently buy in anticipation of that. So it'll be interesting to see if, like you said earlier, like if it's a sell on the halve or a sell on the actual halving, or if that actually kicks into like a larger market cycle.
Yeah, for sure. And another interesting thing with Litecoin is that it's kind of old school proof of work, fair launch type of thing. A lot of other coins and such that we've seen afterward were launched through ICOs, and I think they're like Litecoin has a number 2 as far as hashing powers concerned. They also have ASICs, just like Bitcoin. Not as much hashing power as Bitcoin, but they certainly have one of the highest hashing power blockchains, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting too. It shares unique features as being a commodity as far as like legality is concerned or regulations concerned, similar to Bitcoin. It shares in that. So, but nice. Other than that, it's kind of just, its code's just kind of a copy and paste, right? It doesn't offer a ton.
Yeah, and that's why I've never been inherently like overly bullish on it. And Charlie, he basically sold and or created the top, right? Didn't he sell up around like 300? Basically went all out publicly.
Absolutely. And then he warned people. He said, if you really love Litecoin, make sure you love it at $20. So he pretty much like nailed that market like a champ.
Yeah. So I don't know, man. There's so many lessons just about mass human psychology, and
that's his market experience, right? Like you can tell the way he played that from top to bottom, that he really learned from the previous Litecoin cycle, right?
Yeah,
I learned something from the previous Litecoin cycle that helped me take profit. He really learned it. Obviously, he was probably way more in the trenches in that Litecoin cycle than I was, right?
Yeah. And if you're the biggest whale, potentially the biggest whale, like, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I was watching him accumulate Litecoin at like sub $3 too.
Yeah.
It was dead.
Cool. So yeah, that's kind of my take on Bitcoin. Anything you want to add to that, Rock? Or
yeah, the interesting to note with this type structure is if it does wick down, then it can create that head and shoulders, and it does look like it was creating a head and shoulders. But one interesting thing with this type of head and shoulders play is it is creating higher lows. So just to add to what you're saying, this could very easily transform into a triangle type consolidation pattern that we've seen in previous breakouts. And if it ended up ranging, like what I would look for is a retest of the high, the last high, that would kind of transform it a bit, or like you said, to push up even a bit higher. So it kind of creates like a higher lows and higher highs. And so, yeah, that generally helps to build up pressure because for the breakouts, just like you were saying, because it's buyers just taking up, absorbing whatever supply is within that price range, right?
Yeah. And so this is also a good demonstration of the limitations of technical analysis. Like some people, whenever they like are first learning about TA and they think, oh, head and shoulders, that means price has to go down, right? Well, not necessarily, because you can have both a potentially bullish and a potentially bearish price pattern in the same area, right? Like we talked about the potential for a bull flag here, and you just mentioned the higher lows, but it could also roll over. And that's why it's important to know the difference between predictive or anticipatory price action and reactive price action, right? Like we can look at a market and say, oh, I see reasons why it could go up and reasons why it could go down. But at the end of the day, the question is there any call for action, right? Based on this analysis, is there call for action, right? And you have to be very clear on what price action you would take action against and which price action is really kind of a coin flip like right now. Like I wouldn't say like buy or short right here. I don't know. It's a coin flip. However, if we did get potential number one and we got a fast sell-off, then we would know in hindsight, oh, okay, that head and shoulders actually confirmed itself. And if we get a 25% sell-off, boom, there's my trigger. Or if the bull flag holds up and we get a 1, 2, 3, 4 breakout trade and we get the breakout, boom, there's my trigger, right? So that's why trade setups and entry triggers are so much more important than just price patterns. Price patterns are kind of like the trees in the forest, but the entry triggers and the trade setups is the forest through the trees, if that analogy makes any sense. Does that make sense, guys? Everybody clear on that? You guys see like how you can see TA and like, but at some level it's limited until you actually create a plan around it.
What's interesting about this plan or this map that you have here is that it's kind of like finding win-win strategies, leaning towards bit of bullishness, since we are in my opinion, I think we're in a confirmed bull market. Yes, it can definitely bear trap. That's certainly a possibility that one always has to account for risk management. Yeah. But in many of these scenarios, you could either have like a nice dip buy for a bounce play or a nice breakout setup, right? So it's kind of like because the market structure shifted, it's kind of in my opinion, the probabilities have shifted, leaning towards different scenarios of more highs.
Yeah. And then we become, for lack of a better word, biased to the upside, right? Where we begin to, because we have that confirmation, then we begin to look for long setups until something changes where we would shift that.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I've noticed too, so recently I took some profit around the 8,500 area because of the way that weekly doji candle closed, and I wasn't necessarily going to question. I was like, you know what, I've done some nice trend riding this year. That's not a terrible spot to take some first profit. Even if it goes higher, I'll be satisfied. So what I like about doing stuff like that is it kind of creates a win-win scenario. It's like if it does drop down to the 6K region, then perhaps I'll get a nice little bounce play off of that. If it breaks up higher, then that's good too, because I still have majority of my holdings, right? So that's just going to be a win as well. And so in relation to that, I'm happy that I did that and I did take some profit, because it could have had that had wicked down a lot lower. to kind of complete more of that head and shoulders on the 1 week. If it had tagged down even lower, then the current chart would even seem a little bit more bearish. Oftentimes on those other dead cat bounces on those breakdowns, you had many consecutive red days, just continuous bleed down, right? And this has been holding up and consolidating. So
yeah, completely agree. Cool. So hopefully that's clear, guys. Let's take a look at Ethereum. So this one, which, this Ethereum is really interesting to me because I see some fundamental reasons that make me very cautious about this, but yet the price action gave us a nice trade, so I took it. So basically, again, just to kind of review what has happened. So Ethereum was tracking, if not slightly trailing Bitcoin by, I'd say, a week or so, right? So we got the breakout on Bitcoin, I think somewhere back here. And then as Bitcoin was kind of topping out, we were challenging this level, started buying in this zone for a breakout. And then we got follow through, but you can see this is quote unquote only moved about 50%. I mean, that's a great trade, but I was looking for more. And I think I was kind of reflecting my own desires on this, where I was like expecting it to go for another extension immediately afterwards, where it's really, this price action right here actually looks very similar to Bitcoin. So it was kind of like it was trailing it, and then now it's caught up and it's at that exact same inflection point. Like if you look at this price action right here, looks like either a potential head and shoulders, right, with a 265 rejection area, or if we snap back up above this and make a higher right shoulder, a potential 1, 2, 3, 4 breakout above 280, right? So that's why we're at this inflection zone. So for me, I'm not gonna look to add on 280. That's just my plan, because I want to keep my average entry down below 200. But if that happens, kind of the next zone that I'm looking for, we've got this immediate area at 300, but kind of the more major zone that I would look for is an extension that could potentially take us to 400. Let me just run an extension again. If we look at this as the start of the run, yeah, that doesn't match exactly. It's kind of hard to pull some extensions in this zone, but I would look at those areas if we did get that breakout. But you can see, I mean, 400 has been a very major level. Could also draw up another kind of interim level somewhere around 360. And I think actually 360 actually might line up a little better with an extension. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, actually, so my next target, I would actually adjust that about 360. That's where I'm looking. So if bulls can hold up, that's what I'm looking at. And as I said in my watch list and my trade alerts, if we break down below 220, I would probably just cut that off as a graceful exit. Probably make a little bit, maybe, I don't know, 5, 10, 15% or so. But I would consider that a scratch trade. What I'm really looking for is, now that I've scaled out some of the position here in the 260s, is really for like a continuation move to that 100% and prior price level. So really the area, I mean, if it did break out, I would look anywhere inside of this kind of circle, inside of 360 to 400. Because you don't know exactly where it's going to land, but if we did break out, I'd look at that as a guide. Whereas if it rolls over, shows the head and shoulders, and then we get a lot of selling pressure, I definitely would not look to take a loss on that, because it's done so much. We've had a higher high here, so that's really my plan on that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that zone's being tested. That was the major zone on the ascending triangle breakout in December of 2017.
Yep.
That was a major bounce zone on the one of the big shakeouts.
Yeah, we had a great breakout trade. Oh man, this was one of my favorite trades from 17.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When did it bounce out there? Right there. Boom. So
Right
that
here?
big April, yeah, that April dead cat
April.
bounce.
Yeah.
That's a good one as well.
I think, did this correspond with your Bitcoin dead cat bounce play?
Yeah.
Was that the
Yeah.
same time?
Yeah.
April. Let me see.
Yeah, a lot of vaults kind of.
Actually, I think so. This, because you bought this one, right? On Bitcoin?
Yes. Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. So here's the thing too, right? Like Litecoin has kind of been leading Bitcoin in a way, and then Ethereum has actually been trailing it. Well, I guess so. There's the corresponding bounce in February, but there was a much deeper bounce here in March.
Yeah, Ethereum was kind of lagging. It seems like Ethereum has been lagging behind Bitcoin slightly.
Yeah.
It took longer for it to break down, so that Bitcoin was breaking down, producing those breakdown patterns first at the highs. And so the dead, it kind of lagged behind even where Bitcoin is now. Like Bitcoin is up higher structurally. Where you're pointing to as a target, I think Bitcoin's already at that area.
Yeah. Let's see, 250 from the lows. What we say that was? Yeah. Yeah, so the volatility, I don't know, it's never going to be perfect, but we look for these clues, right? And the clue that I'm seeing is, when the markets are just trading scared or cautiously, like it feels like they have been, they just really seem to track Bitcoin. And that's why I feel like we've just been so focused on Bitcoin's price. I feel like that's the right play. And then you've got, smaller stuff or earlier stuff and smaller stuff like XTZ that somewhat in a way has followed it, but it's so early and it's still so illiquid. I mean, this trades maybe a few $1,000,000 a day on average.
Yeah.
It's still, it's done absolutely flat since last week, since we did the lesson on fibs and creating larger runs. So I won't go through that again since we already covered that. But that's basically what I see here. And then the two potentials here are either volumes. It's very, very simple. We're at a very strong kind of support zone that if a buck doesn't hold up, we're likely going to see that kind of fade until we get another market cycle, right? So it's either this price structure and this bullish structure is going to hold up, or if we have a little bit of a bounce and then it just sells off with low volume, then we're likely going to need to wait for the next market cycle or something fundamentally to happen with this because, like we talked about, there was a fundamental piece here on May 29th, but it was really a non-event. There was no buying activity during it, right before it, or after it. So it's kind of like a non-event.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's pretty much it. I mean, there's a few other things we could talk about. Rock, I'll pass it to you here in a second if you have anything, but that's mainly it. We've been kind of at a wait and see area for the past week or so. Cool. All right, guys. Well, Rock, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
All right. Sounds good, Chris.
Thanks, guys.
Can everyone see my screen? All right. So we'll go through some other coins as well, some other altcoins. One interesting thing too, just drawing a fib. So obviously altcoins make higher percentage gains. There's a lot of correlation, but they make higher percentage gains because they're less liquid, right? So they're smaller ships to steer. You could see that Bitcoin has retraced almost 2 fib levels up. If we were to compare that to Litecoin, Litecoin is almost 2 fib levels up. So what's interesting about that is even though Litecoin is up 500%, and Bitcoin's only up maybe 172% on that. This one's only up 185. Structurally, they're kind of at similar areas, right? But because Litecoin is less liquid and a smaller ship to steer, it has had a higher percentage gain, right? So that's interesting thing to look at. If we did consolidate and break out of this zone, then we're probably looking at least 1 fib level up, unless it shoots. If it starts going up any higher than that, we're going straight into parabolic territory, right? As in, if we did end up taking that price area out and didn't have a solid local top here, like in my opinion, we haven't had a solid correction yet. We haven't had a 30 to 40% correction, right? Most of these corrections here have just been consolidation, which leads me to think, if we break out of this consolidation would be bullish and probably pop another level up. It doesn't top out there. I would anticipate that we'd see the local top here and then probably have a good solid correction if we did break down out from here. But if it doesn't and it starts curving up like this, then suddenly we're getting into all-time high parabolic territory, right? That's a whole other beast. I'm not necessarily anticipating that. I don't necessarily think that's probable at this stage. I'm leaning more towards certainly the market being bullish, but long periods of consolidation and such, and at least a shakeout at some point of 30 to 40%. Right now, the fact that we haven't had a decent shakeout like that means that buyers are likely still in control, as in there's probably a lot of money that was sitting on the sidelines, very eager and hungry to buy some dips, right? When you don't get dips that bleed out super low and they wick up, the biggest one wicked up fairly quickly. There's certainly been a lot of money that was sitting on the sides of hungry dip buyers, people wanting to catch a dip. And likely the reason for that is I think a lot of people actually kind of got left behind in this, because this wasn't necessarily super clear for the average person. It was just kind of like chopping around down here, and it was only on this breakout that we had some more clear confirmation of a trend reversal, right? And obviously making its higher highs and higher lows. Looking at the overall markets, I know that a few markets, a couple Binance markets popped off. I know Link seems like it completely popped off. So this could actually be, we've talked about the popcorn effect for alt markets during altcoin season. Sometimes altcoins can trail and lag behind each other, and you can have some that pop off after periods of consolidation. You can have some that pop off to the next level, right? Maybe looking a little bit more parabolic, larger candles than before. So far it seems like Link has done fairly well this year. But why not? So anyways, this is a new high for it. So I would look for more of this. If you start seeing this across the board of new breakouts on various alts, then that to me tells me that we'll probably see another wave, right? Someone is mentioning Link and Google. Is that news fully confirmed, or is that just a rumor? Rumors also fly quite frequently. I didn't look into that, but let's see. So that leads me into Zcash. Zcash has kind of been underperforming. But what's interesting, which isn't necessary, in my opinion, isn't necessarily a bad thing if I were looking to invest into some more crypto. Like, you know, if I was completely new to crypto and I wanted to buy some crypto right now, something like Zcash that's kind of been underperforming and has kind of just creating a bit of a flat sideways accumulation pattern, bit of a slight inverse head and shoulders here. That kind of broke, retested, but it's been lagging behind. But lagging behind doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to catch up, right? So what I would look for on this, you could kind of see it made a little bit of a bull flag, broke out of that immediate descending line. The only, on a fundamental level, the only thing that could possibly mess up Zcash price discovery would be if something were to have happened in relation to the trusted setup, or if anyone at any point managed to exploit the code to inflate the supply, there would be no way of actually being able to tell that. So that's the only like major fundamental risk behind something like Zcash. But thus far, it just kind of seems like it's lagging behind the other markets. My preference, everyone knows that my preference is to buy or lean towards things that are cheap, that are low, right? So for me, you know, if I looked at something like Link popping off, sure, it would have been great to buy it at the lows here. But when I see something that's already popped off and is already up in the sky, you know, 400+% or whatever, it doesn't, even though it could go up higher, maybe it does a 10x, maybe it goes higher, who knows? It's not the type of play that I personally look for. I wouldn't be hunting. I'd be looking for something else that has a possibility of doing that in future, just a little bit more upside potential, right? Percentage wise. But then again, there's also something to be said for going for the markets that are moving. You know, if you manage to catch an early breakout on this, then that's another story, right? That's another story. You might not necessarily know if this consolidation pattern will hold up or not. You only kind of get confirmation when it actually breaks up or breaks down, right? But when it does break, if you can catch it early, you could see a nice volume spike. So if this is triggered to a news event, whether it's a rumor or whether it's true news event, this would have been a news type play, right? So, you know, back in the day when I was doing these kind of breakout trades on news events, if I heard of a news event like that and I saw the price action starting to break out, I would basically log into my account as quickly as possible, buy some as quickly as possible before everyone else caught on to the news, and it just cascades, right? So if one can get in early, you know, anywhere early in the initial kind of break on the initial news, the earlier the better, right? That's kind of the way I like it. But if I missed it and there's already like a massive candle, even though it could go up higher, the risk reward to me is just like, well, you know, yeah, I could, you know, buy the top, sure, if that, you know, could go up higher, but the risk reward's not that good anymore, right? What if it does a full retrace, or what if that, you know, oftentimes, sometimes when it spikes up like that, you'll have people who are taking profit and such. Was the coin where I did a 10x like that back in early 2016? Was it, oh yeah, it was like 10x in a day or something like that. Yeah, I remember that one. What was it? It was that Ethereum clone. It was Expanse. There you go, Expanse. Let's look at that. This was an interesting. Oh, I guess they got delisted off of Poloniex. Oops. Yeah, it was like right here. In a day, yeah. So I logged into Poloniex and I see this coin. I didn't even know what it was at the time, but I see this coin with tons of volume, and it was already up like, I don't know. I think it was, much was it already up? It was already up like 80% or something like that. And normally I'd look at something like that and be like, oh, 80%. Maybe I don't want to buy something that's already up 80%. But I decided to take a punt at it. And I was like, you know what? This seems like it's really building up a lot of volume right now. So I'm just going to market order some. And I didn't go nuts, but basically just popped. I popped like a 10x in a day. I didn't nail the entire thing. I probably like caught from here to something like this. And I closed, right? It went up higher. So, trades aren't always perfect. So it's like something like that. And I got 1,000% a day, and I took my Bitcoin. I was like, yoink, and that was great. And because I knew what it was, you just saw it was like this massive pump and dump. So I was like, all right, well, the key is if I can catch it early, right? If I'm like at the wheel and it's happening live and I can log in and catch it early and market buy some early, that's one thing. But if you're up here while you're playing hot potato, right, you're likely going to get caught holding the bag if you're the one chasing up in the clouds, right? So that's kind of how those plays. And then you usually get a really nice bounce play afterwards because now a lot of people want to replicate that. So you can kind of see this scenario here. So if you want to, if you're looking for a dip buy, this wasn't super liquid. I think I might have even played around with dip buying too. I can't fully remember on this. I think I was trading at a bit after that 10x too. Anyways, like huge retrace way past the 0.78 zone. But then if you look at where it bounced from there, I mean, just an amazing bounce play, bounced like right up to 6.618 area, right? So even I think I caught some of that. I didn't catch the bottom or top of that bounce play, but I remember trading that at the time. There was some volatility that was happening there, a bit of swing trading, but most of the action was on this day right here. So that was an interesting one. Actually, you know what? Come to think of it, I don't know if I was catching all of these bounce plays here, but there were intraday bounces happening as well, right? All right, Tezos. Request for Tezos. Not much has changed for me in relation to Tezos. Just getting coins in. Still in profit. This holds up great. News recently broke. Let's see, interesting news in relation to that. So let me just find a link for that. So they basically get a former PricewaterhouseCooper blockchain expert as a CFO. This is a person I was working with them at PwC, so they know the foundation and all that stuff. So that's good, more professional brain power for the project and such. Other interesting news was we now have a date for Bakkt, where they're going to start testing on July 22nd, right? So, we have a Litecoin halving coming up. We have Bakkt testing coming up for select clients. and that's probably like the first stage of the live market right there before it fully opens up. So that'll be interesting to see how the markets respond to that. What I actually like about FOMO events is that if these events can produce more FOMO, like I talked about with Litecoin or with Bitcoin, and if we do have any type of parabolic spikes, it can make it very easy to sell on the news type of event, right? I actually personally really like the sell on the news events because they tend to be fairly predictable. It was really nice that we went parabolic leading up to CME. It made it, easy to kind of batten down the hatches and have like a timeline to work towards, per se, even though I didn't quite know exactly where the high would be price-wise on that day. Knew a general time frame as to when the market would likely top out. So it really depends on how market structure reacts. But that's another thing I wanted to point out with Litecoin that we were talking about. I was talking about with Chris, that if there's any massive spikes, like look how the structure seems relatively healthy, right? It shoots up, big retracement, shoots up, retrace, shoots up, retraces. If you have any spikes that start to dwarf any of the other ones, or you see it shooting up, breaking out, leading up to the event, that certainly could be a good sell or short on the news type scenario. Obviously, you'd also want to look at Bitcoin too in this process. You'd want to see what Bitcoin's doing as well. So, all right. I'll look at a few. Can you explain, I got a question, can you explain why BAC needed SEC approval, but now they seem to be able to self-certify? I think it's the ETFs that needed the SEC approval. With this, Bitcoin is a commodity, not a security, so it wouldn't be under the SEC's jurisdiction, as far as I know. That's why we had other futures like CME and CBOE futures and such. So something similar, except the major difference between the two is you settle in Bitcoin. So people could actually use BAC to accumulate real Bitcoin instead of just fictitious futures that are fiat settled, right? Huge difference, which is actually better for accumulation too. If one's going to accumulate, it's always better to accumulate the real thing versus paper, right? Whereas the other futures are really good for shorting because you'd want it settled in cash and in futures. For shorting, you don't necessarily, it would actually be better to have it settled in cash for shorting on a bear trend than it would with other exchanges like BitMEX where they settle in Bitcoin, right? Because you take your profit in Bitcoin, but if the price of Bitcoin is going down, you're not fully hedged, right? You're always having to short to hedge your position unless you just move the Bitcoin and sell them, right? They wanted to launch in January, but they couldn't because they wouldn't get SEC approval. Yeah, I'm not aware of if you have a link to that'd be good. I'm not aware of the SEC declining them. Maybe it was the CFTC, commodity trade people. Okay, this is interesting. Ontology. Where's ONT? It's probably like some mid-cap coin, Binance type. Is it on Binance? Yeah, it's on Binance. It's interesting. Like there's so much volume coming out of these random exchanges, right? A lot of the highest volume exchanges are the most unregulated exchanges because it's a lot easier to wash trade versus you look at a lot of American exchanges where, you would end up in a lot of trouble doing that. You don't see that type of volume pushing. Where this exchange is. Yeah, it's probably yeah, definitely not in the States. All right, ONT. Back to ONT. ONT. USD wise, see what the volume is on Bittrex for that. Finance. Okay, so it's, volume's not bad. Seems like it's been underperforming a little bit. Looks like it's on the lower end of the spectrum. It's still gone up 200 something %, but you can kind of see a consolidation pattern right here. So this is a type of setup where one could possibly catch a breakout if this breaks upwards, right? So this could be a trade setup. So check this out. That 1.618 kind of roughly lines up with this next point of resistance. So let's say it were to break upwards, how I kind of like, you could do horizontal or diagonal breakouts. Diagonals can sometimes get you an earlier fill. Let's see. So let's say one were to catch a breakout. Let's say right there. And cut it if it dropped below this area. Take profit here. That'd be like a kind of like a 3 to 1, 3.6 to 1 for that type of breakout setup. Could look at GMT. Poloniex has the most data on GMT. So we're looking at all-time lows on the BTC chart. Volume on GMT. It's not terrible. Binance, a bit. Let's just look at, so on the USD chart, it kind of looks like it wants to break out of this range. It's making a similar type of market structure type pattern as inverse head and shoulders, right? Not pretty, but the general concept, you know, where you have a low and then it makes a higher low and then tests resistance on the neckline, made a higher low. So at this point, we've seen it making a lot of higher lows. So the next phase after this would be, can it break that and make a higher high, right? I think this one's probably been lagging behind a bit too. See percentage-wise, and again, the percent, yeah, this one's lagging. So that's interesting. People are hunting and searching for ones that are lagging, right? And that's the interesting way that you can cycle through when hunting for coins during alt season and such, is that sometimes when Bitcoin hits a key area where there's a possibility of hitting a local top, a bigger correction consolidation, but you know, it's a possibility. It's not like it's absolute. It consolidates and breaks out and then confirms more bullishness, and you start to see coins recovering, making higher lows, the popcorn effect, some popping, then cycling through and hunting for coins that, okay, which coins haven't gone nuts yet, right? Going through the lists. This one's at 400, this one's at 500%, maybe some are higher. And then you see something like this that's, only gone up 100%, that can mean one of two things, right? Obviously, it can mean that maybe the coin is pure garbage, right? But during alt season, we see absolute trash moving as well, right? So that's not necessarily what the case is. Sometimes it's just kind of like lagging. Coins cycle through, they wave, they lag. Profit can cycle. One thing I used to do a lot during alt season, we were doing a lot of surfing in 2017, where you take profit on one coin that went parabolic, take all the Bitcoin from that profit, and go toss it into another market that's still on the floor that hasn't moved yet or popped off, and just see how many times you could cycle through profit like that before the musical chairs ended, before the music stopped, and then it's time to hedge into cash, right? So one can play that game if there's continuation of alt season, right? And you'll never know. The thing is, like I've talked about, the various different degrees of alt season, we've probably like in a category 2, but you never know that. You don't know that you're in a category, let's say 4 or 5 alt season until it actually hit a 4 or 5, right? So all the early phases and the early breakouts and the early moves up will be in the lower categories until further confirmation, which is obviously why I'm a big fan of trend riding as well, right? And market, and kind of trying to time things even more on the market cycle, wider horizon. But being pleasantly surprised if things pop off a lot sooner than that, right? It's like setting the expectations low and being pleasantly surprised is a lot better than anticipating everything's just going to 10x. I don't think we've quite seen any 10x's on stuff that's liquid anyways. Maybe some illiquid stuff. Even BNB, I wonder how much that went up. I know that had a really good run, but I'm not quite sure if it was a 10x yet. I don't quite think so. Almost, but not a 10x. So I haven't quite seen any 10x's yet, but this is certainly one of the biggest gainers of the year for sure. Okay, ADA and VET and Matic. We'll probably do a shorter update today as well. ADA is still in the gutter, still chopping around in the gutter as far as the Bitcoin charts are concerned. USD charts, it's kind of forming an interesting, it's like an inverse head and shoulders right here, right? Big consolidation pattern. You could even say that this consolidation is kind of turning into a bit of a triangle type pattern, ascending triangle type pattern, right? Could be getting primed for another breakout. And this is the wild thing. So look at this, right? It's gone up 250% USD wise because Bitcoin has gone up. You look at it on the BTC chart, it's been grinding the floor. I mean, it did pop and go up higher, but then it had a big sell-off, and now it's just kind of been at support, grinding sideways at support, right? So the thing with an alt season where you start to see the ridiculous gains like the 10x's and stuff is when you start to see the altcoin charts going parabolic on the BTC charts. right? When you see an altcoin going nuts and vertical on the Bitcoin charts, especially when Bitcoin is high, that's usually when you get those ridiculous dollar gains, right? So I wouldn't say this has been ridiculous dollar gains. Certainly much better profit than you'd squeeze out in a lot of other markets over the course of a few months for sure. But the thing I would be looking for in relation to this is we kind of have a very clear point of resistance. So this could be another breakout trade setup, right? One doesn't necessarily even need to have to try to predict whether or not this is going to go up or down, because we see a very, very clear point of resistance. There's a very clear line in the sand. If it starts breaking that line in the sand on volume, suddenly the probabilities are in favor of it building up momentum for at least another level up, right? And then, target for that right there. Boom. This level of resistance is almost 1.618 zone. Right up here, right? So if it broke out, target for me would be, maybe 100%, right? On a nice breakout. That's how I would treat that. If you wanted to do a classic risk to reward, then you start at the breakout point, set your target, and if it breaks down below the recent low right here, then it starts to look like maybe more of a breakdown pattern. So that would be a 4.3 to 1 risk to reward. Now you got to take into account a 21% stop or 22% stop is it's a wide stop, right? So one way around that is you can position size into it. You don't have to go like all in on the first breakout unless it moves up really, really fast. But maybe there's like different ways of managing breakouts, right? Sometimes if you're lucky, you can catch the first one, right? And then it can pop up, and then perhaps there's like a retest and a dip where it does a throwback to retest it, and that could be a good point to add to it. And then if it starts to bleed below that line, then then one could scale out a part of the position and have this as like the cutoff for the entire position, right? And then if it did that, and it starts to ramp up again, as it's ramping up again, could possibly add a little bit more type of thing until it hits target, right? First target, full size. VET, so that's ADA. Oh, actually, I want to look at Doge quickly. I haven't looked at that one in a billion years. Nope. Is it below 30 Satoshis yet? Nope. Okay, I'm not buying any. Starts getting into the 20s. I might be a believer again. Dogecoin maximalist. That. That's usually my rule of thumb. Just usually buy a bag, as it breaks down below 30 Satoshis. Anywhere from like 25 to 16 Satoshis is an amazing spot to buy it. Tends to be anyways, historically. Yeah, this one. It's not bad. It kind of looks a little bit so-so. I don't know if there's anything with a little bit more history. Kind of see it broke down below this level of support that we had drawn up on the BTC charts. I would need to want to buy something like this. I would need to see it start to break upwards on the BTC chart, because then you get into the opportunity costs, like if it has a bleed out on the BTC chart. And even though there's a lot of correlation amongst many of the altcoins to Bitcoin, there are still some unique situations and circumstances with particular tokens and coins of other fundamental factors of supply and demand, such as, you know, you could have correlation across the charts, but if suddenly an ICO whale or a founder, the company or whatever, decides that they want to dump a bunch of supply of their coins or tokens, then, you know, that can be unforeseen variable that can certainly change the market structure and the pattern that can make it different than other market structures. So even though there's lots of correlation across the board, and we could even still see it with this, I mean, it did gain, right? It did gain with other coins and projects, kind of being lagging behind though. But just because, see, there's two things that I like to see. Just because something's lagging behind for me doesn't mean I'd want to buy it. I'd have to see it lagging behind, but showing some type of bullish structure on the BTC and USD charts, right? You could say that there could be a case for a breakout point here, but if it's, you know, on the BTC chart, you can kind of see it broke down, it popped up, retested prior support as resistance, sold off, right? So I would need a little bit of confirmation to see this start to pop up above that, saying, okay, that was just a new low. It's just, you know, taking a dip, and likely we'll start to see a bounce play if it, you know, creates higher lows and then pops above this resistance point. But if it starts to just bleed and grind out, and this breaks down, like let's say this turns into a bear pennant, right? So if this snaps, then this essentially means it's a bit of a bear pennant, and I wouldn't necessarily want to knife catch that until I saw the market structure kind of start to find better support or shift to the upside, right? So just my thoughts. I mean, with altcoins, you never know, right? You can wake up tomorrow and, you know, Spoofy the bull whale could pump that coin to the moon, right? So just basically it's like hunting for scenarios that have an edge, trying to find stuff that look like it has slightly higher probabilities than other coins. Matic, that was the one that popped off. So we'll do Matic and then we'll wrap it up at that. Oh, it could end up being an accumulation play. It certainly could be. So it's not to say that it, you know, did have a little bit of a V bottom here, and it did produce a higher low. So I would just like to see a little bit more structure on that. That said, you know, if for whatever reason, one thinks that, you know, it's got great fundamentals, or there's some kind of you know, some kind of FOMO news event in the future, it's worth accumulating and not necessarily waiting for more confirmation, maybe kind of just averaging down if one feels like it's at the lower end of the spectrum of its market cycle, find support. But just looking at it purely on a technical without looking at any other element or dynamic, I would want to see that hold up instead of for the breakdown at the because even right here you can see, and here's an interesting thing. This is an accumulation pattern, right? And it did produce fruit, because if you'd bought it anywhere down here, you would have made plus 200% until it started to underperform Bitcoin, right? This is where I underperformed Bitcoin. And so in an instance like that, one could even cut it and then try to buy back lower. The Zcash halvening is in 2020. The specific date of the Zcash halvening in 2020, I think it was in the summertime, but one sec. All right, I'll look at Matic. Okay, so this is one that it's relatively new. It's only on Binance, or let me see. It might be on some other exchanges as well. Let me just double check. Yeah, it's on a few others that aren't listed on Coinigy. So IDEX and Binance is the main one. They're pushing the most volume. Certainly, now it's starting to consolidate. Certainly an interesting move on this. Interesting first move, right? You had an initial break, ramped up, went completely parabolic. Sellers step in, huge crash. It dipped down to sweet spot, my favorite spot, 0.618, right? Sometimes altcoins will, if they're not super liquid, sometimes they'll drag even lower. So in 0.618, had a nice little bounce. It looks to be consolidating right now. You can almost see like a bit of a neckline here, right? If this were to ramp up and break that neckline, then it's possible that this would start to consolidate into a larger triangle type formation, right? So that's the interesting thing with market structure and just kind of going with the flow with market structure, is that you can see a move that is screaming in your face, parabolic, you know, and even if you don't sell in the highs, but you see this, you know, massive doji and then a huge wick of sellers having stepped in, there's a high chance it's probably going to go down lower when you see that, when you see sellers so strong in a massive wick like that. Same if you see a massive wick on the downside. It's usually followed by a nice bounce play. So initially this is just kind of like a mini parabola, right? And so that would be a cause for taking profit and waiting. And in a lot of cases with altcoins, you could even get full retraces where it just breaks down and that's it, and maybe just chops around and does that. But the way it usually shifts and changes its market structure to the bull side, to the continuation side, is after its initial shakeout and bounce. When you see a consolidation pattern, especially if it grows over the course of several months, and then suddenly it produces, you know, higher lows and maybe equal highs, or, you know, just kind of some kind of triangle, either symmetrical or an ascending triangle, right? Then that consolidation means that, you know, supply is being absorbed over the course of months at that level. And if it breaks out of that resistance point, then what looked like a parabola on the much bigger scheme or picture could just be the first move up. And we've showed many examples of that in scale and how in crypto bull trends, the candle sizes and the moves can continue to wave up and get bigger and bigger on a larger scale. And you'll have mini parabolas inside of that. You'll have, usually on each level up, you'll have this parabolic candle where the candle size dwarfs the size of all the other candles, like we saw here. Usually on each level up, that they just get bigger and bigger, right? So you see this one, kind of, this whole candle size was this entire move right here, right? If this were to break out, you know, as it pushes up higher, you know, you'd probably end up seeing a candle that looked like this entire run up. And then what looked like something that was parabolic and nuts suddenly starts to seem small on a larger scale. So you can go back and test that out on previous trends before, if you want to look at the Ethereum charts and, you know, play with the candle sizes. We have shown that in updates. So that would be the bull case scenario. Now, you know, right now, you don't necessarily know that that's going to be the case. But if one were to dip buy, then one could you know, and anytime you're in any trade and you're on the bleeding edge, you don't know how it's going to turn out. So if, let's say one were to buy a dip here, right, maybe a partial size type of thing, scale in and then look for a breakout, right? A breakout would probably be the next entry. If this held up here, that would be another higher low, right? Which would strengthen the case for a breakout. This to me would be an early breakout. I'd probably prefer to try to catch one on the lower end of the spectrum than trying to catch one up here, just because the percentage is like. That said, one could always, if you had a large ascending triangle consolidation pattern, it doesn't mean that one can't build a position within that consolidation, but just full well know that, you know, oftentimes with altcoins, if Bitcoin hits a local top, usually the music can end for Bitcoin, right? So in my opinion, I generally think it's delusional to think that we can have alt seasons without Bitcoin inherently being in a bull trend, right? So it's kind of ironic when you see people chanting for the downfall of Bitcoin, but they want their shitcoin bags to go up. And that to me is like, the reason why I say that's a bit delusional, because it's not necessarily founded in reality, right? Every single time we've had wild alt seasons, it's always been in a Bitcoin bull season for the most part, right? You do have some good bounce plays. Like obviously we had many good alt trade setups, even in 2018 with the bounce plays, the one in April and so on and so forth. So you still get nice setups with dead cat bounces, but they're not, the difference is they're not the kind of they're not necessarily, they're like dead cat bounces. You can make money off of the dead cats, but they're generally producing lower highs, right? Whereas in a bull season, everything's producing higher lows. And as the season gets closer to its exhaustion, those highs get a lot more ridiculous. They get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Until they're this is all good. Even if some of those parabolic candles, maybe it takes years for certain things to play out. It's good to just talk about that, even as a reminder of what to look for, right? The biggest lesson in that is if you see an oversized, massive candle and suddenly you're counting your chips and you're celebrating how much money you made. You know, maybe you're telling people, oh, look how much money you made, or whatever. You're having fun. That's usually a good sign to take profit. Starting to tip into some euphoria there, right? When things are just the money's so easy and the times are so good. At least take some profit off of the table, you know? Anyways, so that's pretty much it for now. I'm just going to leave it there. Yes, CoinDiva says, sell into your ego. Yeah, exactly. One can, you know, we often talk about using market sentiment as a counter indicator. With self-analysis, one of the 4 pillars, you know, technical analysis, fundamental analysis, market sentiment analysis, and self-analysis. With self-analysis, we are a part of the market too. We have emotions. If you find yourself kind of in a really, really good trade that's gone parabolic and you're gloating and doing backflips and you feel like you're on top of the world, that can be a good indicator to sell and take profit too, like sell into one's own celebration, right? Pop that, as soon as you pop that, you know, don't pop the champagne until you take profit. Anyways, we'll end it there. We'll just keep it a shorter update this week and see what the rest of the week brings us, see what the weekend brings us. These weeks seem to be flying by pretty quickly. But anyways, enjoy one's weekends, week, all that fun stuff. Take care, folks. Cheers.